Hi, I'm Libby Gibson, Town Manager. Welcome to What's Going On in Town Government. We have had a really busy couple of weeks here, and it's not over. We're going to have up to Christmas, basically. It's going to be really busy. We're working on the budget for the next fiscal year, the town meeting for the next fiscal year, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in between that's happened and happening that we're working on. At our meeting this week, at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, we had a couple of announcements. One of them had to do with a trip that our Director of Culture and Tourism, Melissa Murphy, recently took to North Korea. I've been saying North Korea. It's really South Korea. But we joked with her about going to North Korea. She would never have come back, obviously, if she went to North Korea. But anyway, she went there for a symposium that actually the director of the Nantucket Historical Association had been invited to. However, he couldn't make it, so he asked her if she wanted to go. Totally paid for by the group that was holding the symposium in South Korea. And it had to do with culture and tourism and economic industry and things like that. And so Melissa gave a really interesting presentation about whaling and tourism on Nantucket and how whaling still, intertwines things a little bit. Not commercial whaling now, obviously, but the sort of aftermath.
Of course.
You know what I mean?
Was she trying to garner up more tourism for us?
Well, not necessarily. They were more sort of getting ideas for everybody involved about how to keep tourism sustained and what attracts people to different things, cultural types of things. And so one of the things that we've been focusing on as a town and community really lately is culture. And we have a cultural district set up. So she talked about some of that stuff. So it was very, very interesting. We also had the fire chief come in and discuss a fire that happened at 21 Helens Drive on Thanksgiving. Very, very, very difficult for those property owners. So he talked about what the response by the fire department was, and everybody was really sorry to hear, that the poor people's house burned.
So where are they now? Do we know?
I'm not exactly sure. They're in a safe home, not really home, temporary housing, I guess I would say. I don't know personally, I don't know the details about that, but that's my understanding. And they're going to, do their best to rebuild.
Sure.
So anybody who can give them support, I'm sure it would be most appreciated. What else do we do?
I got to ask you about the sewer, though. The vote.
Yes.
How does what's the town's position on that vote?
Well, I think the position is that the voters have spoken. They aren't ready to fund a sewer to Nantucket project. We're having an internal staff meeting or meetings to come up with some recommendations to the board about what Plan B might be. And there's a lot of different ideas. Preliminarily, there will probably be some Board of Health review of Board of Health regulations and how long. Some people in Nantucket have been given additional time to install innovative alternative systems. And that time frame will probably be shortened up now because we're not going to have sewer out there. So we don't want these polluting septic systems to continue polluting, basically. So the Board of Health is going to be taking a look at that. And there's probably going to be a series of other things. We are in our budget for fiscal 18 right now. We have increased funds for water quality testing in Long Pond. There seems to be a lot of concern about what the landfill may or may not be contributing. And I can't remember every little thing, but there's a series of things. We're going to be coming back to the board shortly, probably by the beginning of the year.
What are the chances of this coming back onto the ballot again?
Good question. I don't think the selectmen are ready to put it on the town meeting or ballot for 2017. I could not guarantee that, but at our meeting this week, there was a little bit of talk at the end of the meeting about it, and I didn't hear anybody say, let's bring it back. That doesn't mean they won't, at this point in time, based on what I've heard so far, I don't think that is going to happen, but I could be wrong.
Is there a possibility that there's a wait and see on what happens in the harbor before we go ahead and do that?
Of course, the Nantucket Harbor Shimo project is about Nantucket Harbor, not Nantucket.
Right.
So I don't think there's too much of a wait and see possibility with that. But on the other hand, there's a lot of if this, then that, I know this, but I also know that about this project. It is a very, very expensive project. $80 million is a huge amount of money. It's more money than this town has ever spent on a capital project. So people are understandably concerned about that cost. So obviously we need to get back to, what the project is doing, what its area of the project is, and there's a lot of concern about additional development. I thought that had been pretty well addressed by planning with actual facts, but maybe we need to get those out a little bit more. So there's probably a few areas we need to focus on getting information out to people going forward. What else did we do this week? We had an interesting presentation from a group called Vineyard Power that is working on a project called Vineyard Wind south of Nantucket in the Vineyard. They had a map, they had a presentation. The presentation is in the packet that's online if people are interested in it. And we heard a little bit about what the project might do for Nantucket, and we heard about the company itself and what their backing is, and a little bit about the process for the licensing and permitting for the project. Well, they didn't get too deep into this, but it is, I guess, conceivable anyway, that there potentially could be a cable that comes from this project to Nantucket.
Okay.
So that could be able to be of a benefit.
How plausible is this really at this stage? Is this
at this stage? I think it's at this stage it's in the conceptual phase. I think they are getting ready to start getting permitted. But this is going to be a ways off.
Have they had issues on the vineyard, like the ones we have faced?
With the cable?
Well, not only with the cable, but with people not wanting to see them at all. Is there a big backlash?
I think maybe when the Cape Wind project was being proposed, the vineyard was going to see it more clearly than Nantucket. So, but I'm not sure with this particular project there's that level of concern. We did talk a bit about would we be able to see it. On a very clear, it sounded like on a very, very clear day, super clear, you'd be able to see something out there. Okay. You might not, if you didn't know anything about it, you might not realize they were wind turbines, right. But it's going to be something on the horizon on a very clear day. On a hazy day, probably won't really see much. So we had that report. We did a little bit of budget reports. We had some other stuff that nobody cares about.
Affordable housing? That seemed to get a little
The Richmond group, you mean?
Yeah, what happened with that?
Okay.
What's going on?
So, yeah, that did get a little bit contentious. The item on the agenda was for the Board of Selectmen to get an update from the planning director about where the Richmond group is in its permitting process for its housing developments. They're called, let me just check my notes here. They're called Sandpiper Place. That's one project, and that is a home ownership project of 94 units for workforce housing. And there's the other project is called Meadows 2. It's 225 rental units, also for workforce housing. So they are required to go to the planning board and get a special permit for their projects. The planning board routinely applies conditions to special permits. Sometimes the conditions involve things on improvements or modifications to public property. In this case, for example, one of the conditions is likely to be some traffic, some improvements to Old South Road to deal with traffic. One of those things would be a median in the middle of the road, a raised or probably raised median that you wouldn't be able to go across, and a turning lane that would turn into the development. So the question sort of was, can the Board of Selectmen determine at this point, will they allow those types of improvements to go in the public property? Unfortunately, we never really got to that point because there began to be some discussion about a fiscal impact report that Richmond has prepared and what the implications of that report are. So specific to that, in November of 2015, the Board of Selectmen entered into a memorandum of agreement with Richmond about their development. And one of the things that was required was that Richmond prepare a fiscal impact report on what the fiscal impact would be of their project. And they were to provide it to the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. They have done that. The chairman of the Finance Committee has reviewed it and he has some comments on it. Some other staff have some questions maybe here and there about the report, but the Board of Selectmen as a whole has not discussed the report yet. So the Richmond representatives were, I think it's safe to say if you saw the tape, upset that the selectmen hadn't responded yet to the report, and the report really wasn't on the agenda, yet it seemed like it was being discussed or brought up, so they were upset because they wanted to have been able to prepare for that.
Doesn't it come down to the fact that they're trying to get this done now? And
yes,
it's
and they're trying to get it done now. I don't know that I would agree that it's dragging,
okay,
but it's a big project, so it's going to take some time to get permitting. But they understandably don't want to see any delays. So there's a lot of different concerns here. So they don't want to see delays, and obviously we have a very desperate need for housing, and they're trying to get at that. And the selectmen are also understandably concerned about fiscal impact to the taxpayers. And there is going to be some level of fiscal impact on the town budget for maintenance. These roads eventually are all going to be public, in all likelihood. So there's going to be maintenance of the roads, and there's going to be enforcement by police and responses by fire, and other town agencies will be dealing with it like they deal with every other development on the island. So there was some discussion about that. So I think that at next week's meeting, the meeting of the 14th, we're going to have this on the agenda again to try to specifically focus on what sorts of public improvements are likely to be proposed as a result of this project, and is the board going to support those? And does the board have any other ones that they want to work in? Public improvements of public property, that is, not...
When you say improvements
I don't even know if improvements is the right word. Modifications to public property, like this median, like any curbing along the road. Changes to the public road structure, basically.
Isn't that got to happen anyway?
Well, there's a traffic study that Richmond has done, and there's also a peer review that the planning board commissioned to review that traffic study. And yes, there are traffic mitigation changes being recommended. So
okay,
it did get contentious, I have to say. We also talked about the town meeting warrant a little bit for 2017, not specifically the town meeting warrant. We went through kind of quickly the citizen warrant articles that came in for the town meeting. And so just in a nutshell, there are 37 articles.
Yeah.
That were submitted. 12 are zoning, 17 are real estate. There's 1 having to do with the sewer district, and 7 what we'll call other articles. And the FinCom is having a public hearing on these on Monday the 12th at 4 o'clock at 4 Fairgrounds Road, I believe. Check that online.
That would be a good one for
so,
people who really want to...
Yeah, if you're interested. No, it's citizen warrant articles only.
You want to bring up, or any of them interesting enough to talk about? No.
Not really.
Okay.
The citizens can promote their own if they really want to.
Got it, right. If you bring up one, they're going to say, why didn't you bring up mine?
Yeah,
Probably.
so let me not even go down that road.
All right.
So that was something that happened. At our meeting next week, the focus is going to be town administration's presentation on the fiscal 18 general fund budget, more warrant article discussion for 2017, warrant articles of the town that are being developed. Also, our health insurance consultant is coming in to give he gives an annual review of the town's health insurance plan. And there are a couple of other things, the Richmond matter, again, that I mentioned. And, Gino, another thing came up at our meeting under public comment this week from the Mariah Mitchell about the pole relocations that have had to happen for the Milk Street bike path extension. So Mariah Mitchell has expressed some concern, not some concern, serious, grave concern about the poles that are being moved, that have to be moved from one side of the street to the other to make room for the bike path. The concern is that the new poles are higher than the old poles. And they are going to obstruct the view from the observatory. Understandable. We are working actively to resolve that so that the impact to this view is not impacted, basically. So we had some talk about, could we put the wires underground? That is not as easy as it sounds. So the Mariah Mitchell evidently has put out a kind of a call to the public to express its concern on their behalf about this. And I will briefly say, some of these emails are quite nasty, to be frank, and not very factual.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, there's a concern about the public about this, so we're working again actively with the utility companies to address the concern and resolve it. It may or may not involve underground wiring. At whose expense, we don't know yet.
Well, that could be something that maybe could be shared.
It could maybe be shared. It came up at the meeting. Could the Mariah Mitchell pay for it?
Were they happy about that?
No, they didn't think that was reasonable.
All right.
And I'm not sure other people thought it was reasonable either. But I think if the poles can be lowered and the wires are lowered as well to no more than they are now, it shouldn't be a problem. That's my understanding. And you know, some of the comments are, how could the town possibly allow this? You cannot take into consideration every little tiny thing that happens with a project like this. Particularly,
Exactly.
We're not astronomers. We're not engineers. I mean, obviously we have engineers that we're working with, but this just didn't get onto the radar screen early enough, I guess. Also, the poles were made higher because of house moves. There wasn't certainly no effort to, you know, oh, hey, let's just put larger poles in front of the observatory.
Right.
It wasn't like that.
No.
Okay, we're all on the same team here, working to have a bike path, to maintain the Mariah Mitchell. Obviously, hundreds, thousands probably of people visit the observatory every year. Everybody loves the observatory. Nobody wants to go there with wires and poles in the way. That's ridiculous. Some of the people have mentioned lighting. Lighting has never, ever been a part of this project. That's a non-issue.
Right.
So I guess to make a long story short, we're going to get a little bit of a public statement out there that says we're actively working to resolve this. And so we're actively working to resolve it. I don't know what more to say, but I think people need to maybe give us a little time to resolve it.
Right.
And if you really want to send an email, have at it, but I can't even read these emails at this point. They're coming in, and I'm throwing them in a file, and we're going to send a standard response. So it's
Right.
impossible to read them all.
Right.
And some of them are kind of rude, to be frank. They're not
Right.
pleasant at all. So anyway, that's what is going on there. So we're going to be giving an update about this also at next week's meeting.
Oh, good.
So, Gino, what else? Mattocket Sewer. So we covered some kind of biggish things. There's a lot. So as you can see, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, there really is.
A lot going on. Next, we're going to have a fairly decent-sized meeting on the 21st with annual license renewals and some, end of year stuff that's got to get finished up. We don't meet the following week, the 28th, and then we're back at it on January 4th. It's a short Christmas
It's only
break
a couple
this
more
year.
meetings, and then back on what day?
January 4th, Wednesday, January 4th.
Okay.
We have a week off for January. Yeah,
Okay.
Last Christmas break. Last year we had about 2 weeks. This year's
Yeah.
only a week.
Right.
It's
You
unfortunate.
got anything special you're doing for Christmas?
Not really.
Yeah.
Just hopefully relaxing and eating and hanging out with my family and taking the dog on a walk. And, Gino, I always work in that annual cleaning. Like, up in your kitchen where above the stove.
Yes. You know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about.
I'm going to get at that.
You-
I only
you
do
do
it
that?
I only do it every couple years. But then when people come over, I want them to go on a ladder and look at what I did because it's so clean. But nobody's interested in that.
Even though the ladder's set up there for them.
Yes,
they
I
just
set
don't
it up
use
and I give them a tour of what I've done up there. It's gross up there.
Oh, boy.
Oh, speaking of gross, this week we had a company come in and they were videoing a number of the sewer lines in town for the overall assessment of the sewers, part of a bigger plan. So I was able to go up to Main Street yesterday, Upper Main, where they were doing a section of line on Upper Main with the camera, the sewer line. So there's the usual things you might expect to see in a sewer line. It really actually was quite fascinating. The camera is mobile, remote controlled from the inside of this van, and they move it along the line, and you see all kinds of things in there.
You see rats?
I didn't see rats, but I was talking to the guys that were running the camera, and they actually said they haven't seen any rats here, but in many of the other places where they do this work, they talked about rats and a lot of other stuff that they see in there. There's a lot of roots. Roots are a big problem. It's incredible how these roots get into the pipe. So there was this one particular area on Main Street that I guess has had some sewer backups recently, and so the camera got up to that section and its roots, it looks like. Also grease. Grease is a really big problem. They said it's a big problem everywhere, wherever they do this in other towns.
Greasy
cooking grease.
Yeah.
It solidifies and it blocks the pipe. So it's a real problem.
Now, when we have, I've got a piece with both David and Butler talking about the sewers coming up, and they said that is the biggest issue downtown are the roots.
And the grease.
And then if the root's affected, then we got seepage into the harbor pretty much if it's close enough to, right?
Maybe.
Possible?
Well, the idea is that no, because the pipes go to the treatment plant. But
if they're broken by roots.
It all depends on the pipe and where it is and what its angle is. And I mean, in every town, there's probably a little bit of that.
Sure.
We are actively working, probably more than a lot of other towns, to deal with that so that it doesn't go out to the harbor. And that's all going to be coming down the road very shortly now.
Yeah, they're old. We've got some
a lot of
old
them are very
sewers.
old. Yeah, some of them have been. We've been undergoing a rehab project for over 10 years now, and there's a good amount in the downtown area that have been replaced, but there's more to go. Anyway, this sewer line thing was pretty fascinating, but it's a little
unsettling in the stomach.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right.
So I guess that's it.
That's it.
Yeah. All right. Thanks very much. See you next time.